differ. We have three speakers this afternoon, with two speakers which are aligned with, let's say, the research themes which we have within this institute, solar fuels, solar energy, and fusion. And we will start with a talk by Ellen Williams from ARPA-E. You already saw her this morning during the opening ceremony. Maybe background from Ellen. Ellen is the director of the US Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA-E. Prior to joining the ARPA-E, she served as the senior advisor to the Secretary of Energy and as a chief scientist for BP. And even before that, I think some of us know her from, I think, her work as a university professor at the University of Maryland. And even if we go longer back, AT&T Bell, I think. So welcome, Ellen, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here today, and I'd like to tell you about the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy. It is a separate agency within the Department of Energy. It was set up about 6 years ago to complement other activities in the Department of Energy. And I'd like you to pay attention to our logo up in the top, ARPA-E, changing what's possible. And by the end of this talk, I'd like to ask your opinion as to whether you think we're accomplishing changing what's possible. So these are a few pictures of our projects. Before I start telling you about ARPA-E, I, of course, would like to remind you of the context. Our context is strictly energy. We focus on U.S. energy, but that's very much a part of the world's energy system. And we all know that the world's energy system has been changing dramatically. All societies, the U.S. included, have gone from an agrarian society where we got most of our energy from biomass, from wood, and then went through a transformation into fossil fuels. And you can see the transformation times are tens of years, and that even within what seem to be fairly stable periods of times of energy use, there have been oscillations and fluctuations in which of the fossil fuels were most popular. And then most recently, a new onset of new types of transformation, which was the onset of low-carbon renewable fuels, which turns out now to be very important and very topical. And of course, we know why that is. We know that while fossil fuels have been a blessing to the advance of civilization, they have had an unexpected side effect, which is that as we burn the fossil fuels, we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and we are changing our complex atmospheric system in our meteorology in ways that are hard to predict, but we do know that the CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and we are, by our human activities, changing the atmosphere, and we're going to create climate change and global warming. So this is a very important time, a very urgent time to transform the energy sector once again and move from our heavy dependence on fossil fuel to dependences on more clean energy systems. And in that context, ARPA-E was created 6 years ago. Our goal is to look at very specific topics where there's a possibility to create a rapid advance, a transformational advance in the energy system. We're looking at high-risk technological barriers up on top under our mission, and our means say that we're supposed to look at revolutionary advances, we're supposed to translate discoveries into innovations, and we're supposed to undertake research that's too early stage and too full of technical risk for the industry to take on itself. So that's our mission and means. Our mission space is the entire clean energy space. It's expressed in terms of reducing energy imports. In the U.S., that means making the transportation sector less dependent on fossil fuel oil, reducing emissions, including greenhouse gases, and improving energy efficiency across the entire energy sector. And then we're specifically tasked to do this in the context of economic and energy security, not as an intellectual exercise, but really to have social impact. So there's three important themes here: covering the entire energy space, working on transformative, cutting-edge new topics, and being very applications-oriented, looking for short-term applications and results. So those three foci shape everything that we do in ARPA-E, and I'm just going to give you a little preview of the resulting portfolio of what we have been supporting in the 6 years of ARPA-E's existence. Each of these little circles represents a focused topical program. Each of those programs was started in the year where it's indicated and runs for 3 or 4 years. You can see on the vertical axis how the programs spread over the entire energy space from transportation, electric vehicle battery storage, efficiency, both industrial and building efficiency, and more recently resource efficiency, electrical grid and storage for the electrical grid, and clean electricity generation. So you see that we try to cover the entire energy space, and that over time the balance is changing and the topics themselves are changing. As we run through this portfolio, the portfolio itself covers the energy spectrum, the dynamism of looking at new opportunities, and then the third part is the economic impacts. And so in everything that we're doing, we're always asking the question, if this technology works, if the area that we've chosen to do research in is successful, will it matter? So what we're looking for is technologies where we can pick out a transformation that appeared recently and try to drive it forward to the point where it's not just a great technology, but a point where it is at least economically competitive and at best economically attractive. Because we know that to really move new technologies into societal use, into the economic sector, we have to make people want to use them and see benefits in using them. So we work in a very different way from other funding agencies, and this will be my only boring bullet slide with lots of words on it. But we assign every project team. So each of our programs that I mentioned supports 10 or 15 projects. Each project team is assigned 2 of our staff members, a program director who is a technical subject matter expert, and a commercialization advisor. And at the beginning of each project, the program director and the commercialization advisor sit down with the team. They define the goals that they would like to accomplish in 3 years, and they set up a pathway, a set of milestones to get there. And those goals are both technical and economic. And so our program director helps the teams define and meet their technical goals. Our commercialization advisor helps them do their techno-economic analysis, forces them to protect their IP, go out and do customer discovery and economic analysis. And ultimately, at the end of our funding period, we want our teams to have a project and a technology that's at such a good stage of demonstration that they can go out to the private sector, and the private sector will say, aha, this is worth investing further in and develop it for application. So let me give you some examples. Okay, so I'm going to first talk about one of our projects in grid integration, and that's a project called Genie, kind of center upper right there. So just to give you a flavor of some of the different things that we've done. And Genie is a mature program. It's pretty much over. So Genie, Green Electricity Network Integration, our program directors love acronyms, and so all the acronyms are a little bit strange. But this was a program about integrating renewables into the grid. And when we started this program, we wanted to see if it was possible to develop technologies that would allow 30 to 40% integration of renewables into the grid even before we have storage. So what's important here is the electric power grid. Here it is in the United States, the U.S. transmission grid. Transmission grids in other developed countries, pretty much the same thing. They've grown up organically. They grew around population centers and industrial centers and where the power generation sources were, not necessarily logically. And they're a complex, interlinked set of wires and transformers that, frankly, is very old-fashioned. And the result of that is that there's a lot of problems, especially with integrating new forms of clean electricity, such as intermittent renewables. And here's an example. So if you see on the map on the right, look on the map on the left, the little mitten shape, you can see where these two things correspond. And in the map on the left, we can see that that area is well populated with transmission grids. The picture on the right shows the price that a distribution operator is paying for electricity that he or she is then going to sell on to the customers. Over on the left-hand side of that map, they're practically being paid to take the electricity. Over on the right side of the map, they're paying premium prices for the electricity. Yet we see there's lots of transmission lines in between. What's the problem here? This is called congestion. It's because the planning is so primitive and difficult on the grid that it's not possible to reroute the electricity from where it is to where you want it very easily. And this congestion leads to cutbacks in the amount of clean energy that can be actually integrated onto the grid. And so we would like to get rid of that problem. and be able to move the electricity from where it is to where people need it and can buy it most cheaply. And it turns out there are things that can be done that are, right now that are economical and effective and that are starting to be attractive to the business people who run these transmission grids. So what's new is, first of all, right now there's no easy way to move the electricity around. You would like to have an analog faucet where I say 20% of the electricity goes in this wire, 80% on that. Doesn't exist. You've got an on-off switch that at best you have to walk across the room and reset. Might be done once or twice a month. So several of our projects have involved developing new hardware called power flow controllers, which can be used to move the electricity around dynamically in real time in response to the needs of the grid. This particular one is an interesting device. It's a clamp-on inductor. So you can actually clamp it onto the wires without having to disrupt the grid while you're putting it in place. And you need to put a whole bunch of them on a line. But once you've got these in place, they can be used to move the electrical power around and direct where your electrical currents go. And so this company, Smart Wires, has product on the market. They're actually working with 2 different distribution operators in the United States, the Tennessee Valley Authority and a company in California. They have their devices in test on their lines, and they're demonstrating that this can work. So in addition to this hardware, because this gives you the capability to move the power around, the other thing is figuring out which lines to control is a hard question. You see the complicated mess that we have up there. If I want to move my electricity from the left to the right, which of those lines should I turn on and which ones should I turn off? Not easy to decide. These are complex mathematical problems. And of course, in the last 10, 20 years, applied math coupled with advanced computation has made huge advances. And so the little picture on the right is the result of topology software developed by one of our performers at Boston University, an applied math team. They brought their brilliant algorithms to bear on this problem, and they've worked with another distribution operator, PJM, to demonstrate that they can cut back congestion by 40% and greatly increase the integration of renewables on the grid. So these are things that we're changing now, and we're putting these tools in the hands of the companies that want to do electric power distribution, and they're starting to see how they can make a profit and use these things effectively. The end result will be that even before we have the grid storage, we can make great inroads in increasing the amount of renewables that can be integrated into our electric power grid. Okay, next topic, lightweighting. So here's a very interesting topic, and this corresponds to our metals program and energy efficiency program on the center there. So metals is advanced processing and recycling of lightweight metals, the metals program. And what it's about, of course, is the fact that we would like all of our transportation to be much more efficient. We'd like to use less energy for our transportation, both air transport and ground transport. And one way we can make a huge difference in how much energy we use for transportation is by lightweighting the vehicles, using metals like magnesium, aluminum, and titanium instead of steel and iron. Unfortunately, what's old is that processing aluminum, titanium, and magnesium is hugely energy costly and releases a lot of CO2. And then the end products are more expensive than steel and iron. So we would like to do both, reduce the energy cost of producing these metals, and you'd like to drive down the cost of producing those metals so that at the end it's more attractive and economical to bring them into the transportation sector. So what's new is huge advances in electrochemistry and other advanced processing techniques, and we have 15 different teams working on different processes for all 3 of the metals, aluminum, magnesium, and titanium, and also innovative recycling approaches. And we believe it's going to be possible to bring down the prices of these metals at least 10%, if not much more, and the energy costs associated with them. Okay, next one, solar energy and storage. And so this is one that's very near and dear, I think, to the heart here in Differ. We're going to look at the FOCUS program on the upper right there. Okay, so in the FOCUS program, we're looking at utilizing the full spectrum of solar energy. And the problem that we're trying to solve, of course, is the canonical problem with solar energy, which is that solar energy is only with us part of the day, but we need electricity all the time. We need some way to store the sunlight energy so that we can use it at other times of day and integrate it properly with the distribution system. There's been an old concept to solve this problem of storing solar energy, which is to collect the sunlight as heat and store it in molten salts, and then return the heat through a heat engine back to electricity when it's needed. That's a great idea, but unfortunately, over 20 years of research, it's proven very, very difficult and costly and hard to get this concentrated solar thermal energy down to a cost point that is competitive and attractive. So the idea in the FOCUS program is to combine solar thermal energy with solar photovoltaic energy. And the point that we use here is that when we're creating photovoltaic electricity directly from sunlight, we're primarily using the high energy parts of the solar spectrum, the green, blue, and purple colors in the solar spectrum, whereas all of the colors in the spectrum can contribute to heat. So what we're going to do in the FOCUS program, and what we're doing in the FOCUS program, is combining photovoltaics with thermal collection. So there's two benefits here. One is that we're capturing all the energy in the sunlight, some of it as electricity directly, some of it as heat, but also the electricity that comes from the PV can be sold at a higher price. It's more efficient than the electricity that comes from the heat. So we can drive the price point down. So there's many technical issues here. You either have to get your photovoltaics able to work at high temperatures so that they can work on top of the heat collection, or you have to be able to separate the colors of sunlight initially. We've got teams working on both approaches, very exciting physics going on, and lots of advances that we think will return the benefits that we expect here. Okay, and then the last one I want to tell you about is buildings, and this is our Delta program over on the right. This is another efficiency program, developing localized thermal management systems. And what's important, this is for the United States, it shows all the energy that's used in buildings in the United States, and that represents about 40% of our primary energy use, and that number is very similar in all developed countries. And you can see up on the top that heating, cooling, and ventilation are about a third of that very large fraction. So if we can make improvements in the amount of energy that we use for heating and cooling our buildings, we can reduce our energy use dramatically. So what's old here, lots of people have worked on building efficiency, but we're approaching it from a different perspective. What's old here is that we heat all of buildings, the entire building, for the benefit of the relatively small space that the people in the building actually occupy. So for instance, we don't need to heat that corner of the room over there. There's nobody there. But it's not easy to deal with that. So what we'd like to do is figure out, are there ways that we can address the thermal comfort of the people in the building without having to maintain the temperature control over the entire building. And if we can do that, if we could just raise the set point that we allow the temperature in a building to oscillate about, we could save at least 25% of the energy that we use for heating and cooling the buildings. So in this one, I'm going to show you a couple of examples. This is one of our newer programs. We went out for the call for proposals, and we were amazed by the creativity and the diversity of the ideas that came back to us for this type of concepts. So personal heating and cooling, a whole series of concepts came to us that have the ventilation coming to you. This one I really like. I want my own personal robot that will follow me around the room, sense whether I'm hot or cold, and adjust my atmosphere around me personally. A little less personally, perhaps in the room you would have ventilators that would identify where the person was in the room and direct the flow of heating and cooling to that person directly. And then alternatively, we had quite a lot of very creative ideas come to us in the forms of ways of manufacturing fabrics for clothing that would allow you to automatically adjust your response to the atmosphere around you. So the one that's shown here is a cloth that would incorporate a thermal reflective layer that would change and allow IR heat to be released from your body when you are warm, trap IR heat into your body when you are cold. Other ideas have the fabric expanding or contracting to allow diffusive release of heat. So very exciting concepts here, and we have lots of fabric companies and clothing companies like Nike very interested in this project. Okay, and then the last thing I just want to tell you about is one of our very early projects. We have a lot of projects that have proven successful. Our mandate is always to take on high risk, high potential payoff projects. This particular project, when we picked it up, a lot of people said that's too high risk. And the project is Makani, and the idea is to have an airborne wind turbine. And so when Makani came to us, this was their concept. They were going to create a autonomous vehicle, and the propellers on the vehicle could be used for two things. One, they could be used to drive the vehicle and take it up to elevation, but then they could be used as wind turbines. And so the concept here is that the airborne turbines go up. They do this figure-8 configuration, blowing across the wind, and they drive the electrical power down a tether where it's collected on Earth. So at the time that we funded this project, they were working with this 8-meter prototype. They had a significant problem, which was that the aerodynamic controls to do these complicated maneuvers, and in particular to bring the kite back down to Earth on its tether, weren't advanced enough. So we funded them for a few years to develop those controls, and they demonstrated a 10-kilowatt delivery of power from their wind-borne turbine. After our funding was done, they picked up follow-on funding from Google Ventures, which has been putting a lot of money into them. They're now up to the demonstration stage on a 250-kilowatt version, which they believe they will have flying and delivering power within the year, and they expect to be on the market in 2 years. This is going to change wind if it works, because when you can get your wind collection up above 100 meters, so between 100 and 300 meters, you've got steady wind. You can tap wind in many, many more areas, including offshore, much less expensively and in places where you couldn't do it before. So we think this is going to be a huge transformation. So that was a high-risk project that paid off. Okay, so I mentioned Makani getting follow-on funding from Google Ventures. We look to really help all of our project teams get follow-on funding when they're done with their support from us. And about 20% of our projects do get follow-on funding from the private sector, and another 20% get follow-on funding from other government agencies. It doesn't just happen. That doesn't just fall out of the sky. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of matchmaking to make that happen. One of the ways that we do this is with our ARPA-E Summit. We have an annual technology showcase where all of our active performers come. We arrange meet and greet sessions for them. We bring in as many private sector investors as we can attract, government agencies, regional development agencies, professional societies, and in every way try to create the networks and the interactions that allow our teams to make the connections and then develop their follow-on funding to continue to develop their technologies. Okay, so let me return then to where I started, because when I started, I showed you a plot of how the U.S. energy system has changed in the last 150 years or so. This is a similar kind of plot from the Energy Agency within the Department of Energy Information Agency. And on the left-hand side here, it shows the historical trends of energy use in the U.S., and then, starting from today, moving forward to 2040, a projection into the future. The projection in the future here is very discouraging because the U.S. needs to go down in energy use, and its CO2 consumption needs to go down if we're going to meet the climate goals of the world. But those projections in the future are not fixed. They're not immutable. This is not what should happen. It's not what has to happen. It's only what is most likely to happen right now based on the economics that the people who do these projections see. And as technical innovators, we can change those projections and we can change the future. So if you look over on the right, it shows a transformation in the U.S. that would have to happen to move up to the goals needed to meet the standards for U.S. energy efficiency and CO2 emissions. So what you see is we have to have a lot more energy efficiency to drive down the amount of energy that we're using, and we need to have a lot more renewable energy, and we need to change the mix of the fossil fuels. We won't be done with fossil fuels by 2040, but we'll be on the way to getting rid of them. So those are the goals that we have to meet, and the only way we're going to do that and make it economically attractive so that people will actually pick this up and drive it forward is by technology innovation. And I hope that I've showed you, and I think from your experience here at DIFR, I hope you agree that we have the power to make those technical innovations happen that will drive this type of transformation. So I think that's the end for me. We have a newsletter, which I hope you sign up for, and we would really love to have you come to our technology showcase, which is at the end of February this year. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ellen, for this inspirational talk. Are there some questions? Just looking at Wim.
Wim Sinke, Energy Research Center of the Netherlands.
Yes.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I wonder, the examples that you showed, some of them appear rather application-oriented. They may be high risk, but it's not basic research per se. Can you say the TRL levels that you're trying to cover with your program?
Yeah. Okay, so typically we cover from 2 to 6. So we see, so the Department of Energy has a basic research arm, the Office of Science, and the U.S. also has a National Science Foundation. So we see those basic research organizations as providing the inputs. And so what we're looking for is brilliant, innovative things coming out of basic research, which we can then identify and say, that one, let's see if we can move it forward to a prototype.
You didn't mention solar fuels. Is that not covered by our program because it's too low in TRL, or you didn't pick the example?
Yeah, I just didn't pick that example. We have had individual projects in the solar fuel space, and we're actually considering right now a program in what we're calling hydrogen-carrying fuels, which we'll decide in the next 6 months or so whether to run.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Joost?
So how do you actually drive the result of such research programs into the actual application? Do you play a role in that transfer?
Oh, absolutely. So when we define a program to begin with, the program director starts out by defining techno-economic goals for the program. So for instance, for the FOCUS program that I mentioned, we have specific cost and efficiency goals that we set up as the goals of the program. And so the people who are proposing to the program know that they're entering a program where they're going to be asked to take their technology and move it forward against those goals. So there's a selection process in the beginning that the people who come into the program know that they are going to be asked to push an application. And then the other part of it, because even though they may know that, they may not really have internalized it. And so the other part is that the very close working with our program directors and our commercialization advisors is that we push those teams very, very hard to keep driving their technologies forward. And in the process that we ask them and force them to go out and talk to industry and discover potential customers and change their project if need be to drive towards commercial applications. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Paul Knops. Are you limited to the States, or are you open for also European people attending?
Everybody can attend our summit. We'd love to have you attend our summit. We're limited to U.S. companies and performers for our funding.
So you have to move.
You have to move, yes. Please.
Albert Goede from DIFFE. How does carbon capture figure in your program?
Yes, we've had, one of our early programs was on carbon capture, and we did some very nice work there on developing some new carbon capture technologies that reduce the energy penalty about 30%. Those projects have now been handed over to the Department of Energy's fossil energy program, where they're being developed further for potential demonstrations. As we move along, we're constantly assessing whether there's another opportunity for us in this space.
Another question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wim van Saros, NWO. I'd like to invite you to reflect a little bit on the role of the government in pushing such technology and research, because just as a bit of background, in this country, the Department of Economic Affairs is not really itself involved in selection of projects, etc. And I would like you to reflect on the role that you have in the United States as a government agency. I mean, or, I mean, I see you hesitate.
Well, I'm wondering what the question actually is.
Well, I'll put it more bluntly.
Yes.
I mean, can you push such type of programs without having it being done at a government agency? I mean, can you really hand it to an agency like the Science Foundation or something like that?
Our basic science organizations do have, in some cases, activities. I think there's a real dichotomy. We often see fundamental science, and then we talk about tech transfer. And there seems to be a little bit of an attitude that, oh, look, somebody discovered something nice. All I have to do is unlock the cupboard and hand it over. And the reality is that when something's come out of a basic research laboratory, it is a very hard process to move it from that initial place where it looks good to the point where it's investable. And so that's the space that we fill. And conceivably, it could be done by a fundamental agency, but it really requires a different mindset because the people who work on these projects really step outside their basic research roles. We've had wonderful examples where a professor, highly talented basic research scientist says, okay, I'm going to take this project, I'm going to step out for 3 years, steps out, develops it, starts a company, hands it off, and comes back to basic research again. That's a beautiful example, but culturally it's very, very difficult. So I think that probably having this agency separate at this stage is necessary. If in the future it could be tied more closely to the basic energy programs, perhaps that would be nice. But it's very, very hard to change that basic science culture.
Okay. Is there another question? Oh, yes.
Thank you.
I was still present at in one of your last few graphs.
Yes?
In which you showed the change in carbon dioxide emission.
Yeah.
But if you look to the graph, would it not implicitly mean that you change transport?
Yes. So the decreasing reliance on oil requires a change in transport. So that may be much more efficiency in the transport, but also electrification. But the electrification, of course, requires that you have clean power because otherwise you're just moving the emissions from one place to another. So implicit in this is transportation, and a big part of our program is transportation efficiency, EV storage, and alternative fuels. Yeah, and solar fuels would be, in fact, one wonderful approach to dealing with some of the transportation issues.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. If there is no other question, I would like to thank Ellen again for the very nice presentation. And you got another goodie bag. Okay. Thank you very much.